Hey everyone, welcome back to more malicious compliance HOA stories. My HOA president prohibited me from plowing snow at no charge because she was convinced I was running some sort of commercial scheme. The best part? Nobody in the neighborhood had any idea until we got buried under 2 feet of snow and couldn't even get out of our own street. What follows is a masterclass in malicious compliance. Let's jump right into it. The first story is titled, "Don't Want Us to Clear the Roof Anymore." Okay, Fina, you'll regret it. So I work for a company that removes snow from rooftops during the winter months. It's incredibly tough work and sometimes oddly satisfying. We got a tremendous amount of snow this year. The last time it snowed this heavily was nearly 20 years ago, so there's plenty of work to go around. Anyway, earlier this week, we were clearing a network of rooftops at a large spa and resort complex. One of those buildings happened to be an ice arena. There was over a meter, 3 feet, of snow sitting on that particular roof, and it was dense. It's a massive structure, and even with a crew of 10 people, it would have taken several days to finish the job. On the morning of the second day, the GM of the spa decided it was getting too costly to keep us on and let us go. My boss tried to explain that sending us away wasn't a smart move given that the weather was warming up and snow becomes extremely heavy when it gets wet. The GM didn't want to hear any of it. So we packed up our gear and cleared out that day. A few days later, on Thursday, temperatures climbed and the snow began melting fast. By Friday, it had started raining, and my boss received a panic call from the GM. The roof of the ice arena had partially collapsed under the weight of the snow, and he desperately needed a crew to continue lightening the load. Sorry, but we can't set foot on a structurally compromised building. You're going to have to rebuild that roof. And yeah, guys, that's exactly why you should always treat the people responsible for snow removal with respect. Maybe that business owner finally learned his lesson. Either way, if you enjoy malicious compliance stories, please don't forget to like the video and maybe drop a comment telling me where you're watching from today. It's genuinely appreciated. The next story is titled, HOA, Karen bans me from her neighborhood and demands that I stop snow removal, posted on her /malicious compliance. So I own a small landscaping and snow removal business in upstate New York, and I live in what I always assumed was a pretty normal neighborhood. My property sits at the end of a private road that connects to what everyone refers to as the HOA streets, even though they're technically public roads that just happen to run through an HOA community. The whole arrangement is a bit unusual, but it worked, or at least it did until this Karen showed up. For some background, my house and shop sit on roughly 3 acres at the very back of this development. When the neighborhood was originally built in the 90s, the developer sold my lot separately because it was larger and zoned for home business use. I bought it 6 years ago specifically so I could run my equipment and store my trucks without anyone giving me grief. The catch is that to reach my property, I have to drive through about half a mile of neighborhood streets. I have a legal easement and right-of-way written into my deed, which essentially means I can access my property regardless of what anyone says. That becomes relevant a little later. I got a solid setup. I run a 2-truck operation handling commercial snow removal for office parks, shopping centers, that sort of thing. During winter, I'm out from 3 a.m. until sometimes noon, just clearing parking lots. It pays well, but it's grueling work. I also own an older Chevy 2500 with a straight blade that I use for my own long driveway and the private road leading to my property. Here's where the neighborly part comes in. For some context, over the past 6 winters, after finishing my driveway and private road, I've been casually plowing the main streets in the HOA neighborhood on my way out to work. It takes me maybe an extra 30 minutes total and costs me virtually nothing since I'm already out there with the truck warmed up and the plow attached. The neighborhood has maybe 40 houses and the street layout is straightforward. Just a main loop road and 3 small side streets. It's easy work and the residents absolutely loved it. People would smile at me as I drove by while they scraped their windshields. I'd find thank you notes in my mailbox, cookies on my porch around the holidays, that kind of thing. It was just a nice community gesture, you know. I never asked for anything and they never offered to pay me. It was simply me being a decent neighbor. And by the way, guys, just a quick little quiz here for you. Do you think good deeds like the ones OP is doing go unpunished in HOA neighborhoods? Let me know what you think in the comments. Important detail: I'm not part of the HOA, and my property was never included within the HOA boundaries when they were established. I can use the streets because they're public roads and I have that easement, but I don't pay HOA dues and I'm not bound by their rules. This had never been an issue because I keep my property tidy. My trucks are parked behind my shop building where nobody can see them from the street, and I generally keep to myself. Well, about 15 months ago, this woman and her husband moved into one of the larger houses near the neighborhood entrance. I won't use real names here, but everyone refer to her as Karen behind her back, so that's what I'll go with. Karen was around 50, drove a white SUV, and had that particular haircut. You know the one. She had strong opinions about everything and made absolutely sure everyone was aware of them. Within 2 months of moving in, Karen had gotten herself elected HOA president. The previous president was a pleasant older gentleman who barely did anything. And I think people voted for Karen because she came across as organized and motivated at meetings. Big mistake, though. She immediately began issuing violation notices for the most trivial things. Someone's mailbox was the wrong shade of black. Someone else had their trash cans visible from the street for 20 minutes too long on trash day. She drafted a 9-page document outlining what kinds of holiday decorations were acceptable. In short, it was absolutely unhinged. I stayed out of it because, again, I'm not in the HOA, and my interactions with Karen basically amounted to waving as I drove past her house on my way to work. She never waved back, but whatever. Not everyone's a morning person. Then last October, things took a turn. I found a letter stuffed in my mailbox from the HOA. Not mailed, just shoved in there. The letter stated that the HOA had reviewed its financial obligations and determined that all residents utilizing HOA-maintained streets would be required to pay a new annual street maintenance fee of $500. It said the fee was due by November 1st, and that failure to pay would result in restricted access to HOA amenities. I read the thing 3 times trying to make sense of it. HOA-maintained streets? The streets are maintained by the township. They plow them, patch them, the whole deal. The HOA doesn't maintain anything except the little entrance sign and some flowers around it. And what amenities? There's no pool, no clubhouse, nothing. I called the number on the letter, and Karen picked up. I stayed polite and explained that I wasn't part of the HOA and didn't think the fee applied to me. She cut me off and said that anyone using the streets needed to contribute to their upkeep. I pointed out that the township maintains the streets and that I have a legal easement to access my property, and she said that was irrelevant and that the HOA board had voted and the decision was final. I told her I wouldn't be paying since I'm not an HOA member and don't use any services they provide. She went quiet for a moment and then said, "We'll see about that," and hung up. I figured that was the end of it. I wasn't concerned because I know my property rights. My lawyer had reviewed everything when I purchased the place, and the easement is rock solid. The streets are public roads, and she simply cannot ban me from driving on them. Well, 2 weeks later, another letter arrived. This one was more formal. It stated that because I had refused to contribute to street maintenance despite regularly benefiting from the HOA's snow removal services, the HOA was formally prohibiting me and my commercial vehicles from operating on HOA streets. It said I was banned from conducting any snow removal operations on HOA property, and that if I was caught plowing HOA streets, I would be fined $100 per occurrence. I had to read that twice. She actually believed I was charging for the plowing or that the HOA had been paying for it. I called her back, and this time I was considerably less polite. I explained that I'd been plowing the streets for free as a courtesy for 6 years. I told her I'd never charged anyone or received a single payment from the HOA. I said I was doing it because I'm a good neighbor and it takes me 30 minutes. She actually laughed at me and said, "Nice try. You're running a commercial operation and using our streets as your personal client base. The board has reviewed your business and determined this constitutes unauthorized commercial activity." I was completely baffled. Client base? I'm plowing for free. Nobody is paying me. She said, "Then you won't mind stopping. Effective immediately, you are prohibited from operating your snow plow on HOA streets. If you need to access your property, You may drive your personal vehicle only. No commercial trucks, no plows, no equipment. This is your final warning. I asked what I was supposed to do when it snowed, and she said the HOA would contract with a professional service and residents would no longer need to depend on unauthorized volunteers. I asked whether she had already arranged this service, and she said that was HOA business and none of my concern. I sat there for a moment, just processing that. Famous last words, by the way, guys. Then I said, just to be clear, you're ordering me not to plow the neighborhood streets anymore, correct? She said, that's right. You're banned from snow removal operations on HOA property. Do not make me issue a formal cease and desist. I said, okay, and hung up. Here's the thing, guys. I was irritated, but also somewhat relieved. Plowing the neighborhood was a nice gesture, but it was also unpaid labor I'd been doing out of pure goodwill. If she wanted to ban me from doing free work, fine. I had plenty of paying clients to focus on anyway. I sent her an email that same day, very professional. I wrote, per our phone conversation today, I acknowledge your directive that I cease all snow removal operations on HOA streets effective immediately. I will comply with this request and will restrict my plowing to my private property boundaries only. Thank you for clarifying the HOA's position. I CC'd the email to my attorney just to establish a paper trail. He replied telling me to document everything and photograph anything that got strange. I also sent a quick text to a few neighbors I was friendly with, letting them know the HOA had asked me to stop plowing the neighborhood. Most were confused and said they'd speak with Karen. Well, November came and went without any snow. The weather stayed unseasonably warm, and Karen sent out an email to all residents in mid-November announcing that the HOA had secured a contract with a professional snow removal service and that the streets would be properly maintained that season. She didn't name the company, and nobody seemed to know who it was, but whatever. Not my problem, right? The first real snow arrived on December 3rd. It was a Tuesday morning, and we got hit with about 14 in overnight. I woke up at 2:30 a.m. as usual, checked the radar, and headed out to start my commercial route. I plowed my long driveway and private road as normal, and when I reached the point where my property ends and the HOA streets begin, I stopped. My plow was raised, the blade sitting high above the snow. The neighborhood streets were completely buried. I drove through slowly in my personal truck, regular tires, no plow. It was rough going. The snow was deep and heavy. I passed about 6 houses where people were already outside with shovels, trying to clear paths to their driveways. A couple of people waved at me. One guy yelled something, but I couldn't make it out through my closed windows. I spent the morning clearing my commercial accounts as usual, and when I got home around noon, I had 7 missed calls and about 15 text messages. 3 were from neighbors asking if I'd forgotten to plow. 4 were asking if my truck had broken down, and the rest wanted to know what was going on. I replied to a few of them, explaining that the HOA president had formally banned me from plowing streets. I sent screenshots of Karen's letter along with my email response. The reactions were immediate. People were confused, then furious. And apparently nobody had known about this ban except Karen and maybe 1 or 2 board members who never attended meetings. One neighbor, a guy named Tim who lives 4 houses down from the entrance, called me directly. He was livid. He said he'd been trying to get out for work all morning and couldn't get his car up the street. He'd called Karen, and she told him the plow service was on its way, but nobody had ever shown up. He asked if I could just go ahead and plow anyway, and I told him I wanted to help but couldn't risk the fines. He said he understood and that he was going to take care of it. By that evening, the neighborhood Facebook group was exploding. I'm not in it, but Tim was sending me screenshots. People were demanding to know why the streets hadn't been plowed. Someone posted a photo of my immaculate driveway right next to the buried neighborhood street with a caption asking what was going on. Karen eventually posted saying the contracted service had been delayed due to high demand, but would arrive first thing the next morning. Tomorrow came, still no plow. The snow from the first storm had settled, and then another 6 in fell Wednesday night. Now the streets had close to 20 in of packed snow and ice, and people were stranded. I watched from my property as neighbors tried to dig themselves out. Some were carpooling, parking at the neighborhood entrance, and trudging through the snow to reach their vehicles. It was, in short, complete chaos. I headed out Thursday morning for my commercial route. Same routine. I plowed my property and stopped at the boundary. My driveway looked like it existed in an entirely different world compared to the neighborhood streets. I felt guilty, but I also wasn't about to rack up $100 fines for trying to help. Thursday afternoon, I got a call from an unfamiliar number. It was an elderly woman named Margaret who lives on one of the side streets. She was nearly in tears. She said she'd had a doctor's appointment that morning and couldn't even leave her house. Her daughter had taken the day off work to come pick her up, but her daughter's car got stuck trying to turn onto Margaret Street. She asked if there was any way I could just quickly plow her street. I felt awful. I told her I couldn't because of the HOA ban, but that she should call Karen and make a complaint. She said she called Karen 3 times and kept getting sent to voicemail, and that other neighbors were experiencing the same thing. That evening, an emergency post appeared in the Facebook group. Someone had filed a complaint with the township stating that the streets were a safety hazard, and the township had apparently contacted the HOA asking about their snow removal plan. Karen posted saying the situation was under control and that she was working with contractors to address the delays. Then Friday brought more snow, another 8 inches. The neighborhood was completely impassable except for people with trucks or SUVs who could more or less force their way through. The main loop road looked like a sledding hill, and I spotted someone's Honda Accord stuck at an angle halfway up the street near Tim's house, just abandoned there. By Friday afternoon, residents were getting desperate. Someone posted that they called 3 different plow companies, and the cheapest quote was $1,200 for emergency service. The HOA only had around $8,000 in their annual budget, and most of it had already been spent on Karen's landscaping projects for the entrance sign. There was absolutely no way they could cover multiple emergency plows. Saturday morning, I woke up to find roughly 30 people standing at the neighborhood entrance holding handmade signs. I'm not even exaggerating, actual protest signs. One read, "Where's our plow?" Another said, "HOA failed us." Someone had made a sign with Karen's face poorly photoshopped onto a picture of the Snow Queen from Frozen. It was petty, but honestly kind of hilarious. I later found out Tim had organized the whole thing. He'd been spreading the word about what Karen had done, showing people the letter she'd sent me, explaining that I'd been plowing for free for years and she'd banned me because she thought I was running some kind of scam, and people were outraged. Karen drove past the protest around 10 a.m. and apparently stopped to yell at people. Someone captured it on their phone, and it ended up in the Facebook group. She was screaming about harassment, insisting she was doing her best, and accusing everyone of being ungrateful. Someone yelled back asking where the contracted plow service was, and she said they were dealing with equipment issues before driving away. That afternoon, the township got involved again. A code enforcement officer showed up and walked the streets taking photos. He reportedly told several residents that the HOA needed to clear the streets within 48 hours or the township would handle it themselves and bill the HOA at an estimated cost of around $3,000. Sunday was when everything finally unraveled. A board member, not Karen, sent out an email calling for an emergency meeting that evening. The email stated that due to recent concerns about snow removal and other matters, the board felt it was essential to hear from residents. The meeting was scheduled for 6 p.m. at the community center building that the township lets them use for free. Normally, these meetings draw maybe 8 or 10 people, but that night over 60 showed up. The room was packed with people standing along the back wall. I heard afterward that someone had to prop the door open because it was getting too hot from the crowd. I didn't attend since I'm not an HOA member, but Tim called me afterward and gave me a full rundown. He said it was the most dramatic thing he'd ever witnessed. Karen opened the meeting trying to project control. She had an entire speech prepared about unprecedented weather challenges and vendor reliability issues. She attempted to explain that the contracted snow removal company had suffered mechanical failures and that she was actively sourcing alternative providers. Someone interrupted and asked for the company's name, but Karen said it was confidential vendor information. Someone else suggested that sounded a lot like there was no company at all. Karen insisted there was, but then Tim stood up and dropped the bombshell. He had done his homework. He produced documents from October showing how Karen had supposedly obtained approval for the ban on my plowing. The meeting minutes revealed that only 3 board members had been present: Karen, her friend Linda, who served as secretary, and one other person who lived out of state and had called in. There was no quorum, which according to the bylaws meant they couldn't pass any binding votes. The ban was entirely invalid. Then he dropped the second bomb. He had obtained quotes from 3 different snow removal companies for the full season. Professional seasonal contracts range from $3,500 to $5,000 for unlimited plowing. Even emergency one-time service ran at least $1,000 per visit. And not one of these companies had any record of being contacted by the HOA. Karen tried to talk over him, but people were shouting questions. Where did the money go? Why was there no contract? Why had she banned the free plowing? Someone else stood up and said they'd been reviewing the HOA finances and found that Karen had spent $4,200 from the annual budget on new landscaping around the entrance sign, including decorative rocks that cost $900. She had also approved paying her friend Linda $300 a month for so-called administrative services, something nobody had ever voted on. Things got ugly fast. People were shouting. Karen was shouting back, insisting she had the authority as president to make executive decisions. Someone pointed out that the bylaws explicitly required a full board vote for any expenditure over $500. Then Margaret, the elderly woman who had called me about her doctor's appointment, stood up. She's apparently a well-respected longtime resident, and she stated very calmly that she had personally witnessed 6 years of me plowing the streets at no charge, that I had never once asked for anything in return, and that Karen had manufactured a conflict where none had ever existed. She said Karen's actions had directly put residents in danger, including herself. The room fell silent. Then someone made a motion to hold an immediate vote of no confidence against the entire board. Someone else seconded it. Karen tried to argue that proper notice was required, but the bylaws actually permit emergency votes when more than 50% of residents are present, and they had just over 60% in the room. They voted. It was nearly unanimous, with the exception of Linda and 2 others. Karen, Linda, and the remaining board members were removed effective immediately, and a quick election for an interim board was held on the spot. Tim was voted in as temporary president alongside 3 others, and their very first official act was to pass a motion formally apologizing to me for the harassment and officially rescinding the ban. Tim called me around 9 p.m., walked me through everything that had happened, and asked if I'd be willing to plow the streets one more time to get everyone unstuck. He said they couldn't pay me since the budget was completely drained, but he'd make sure everyone understood I was doing them a favor. I told him I'd do it, but I wanted something in writing first. I wasn't about to get burned a second time. He sent me an official email signed by the new board members stating that I was authorized to plow the streets, that I was doing so voluntarily without compensation, and that the HOA acknowledged no claims or liability against me. Good enough. I headed out that night around 10 p.m. with my plow truck and spent roughly 4 hours clearing the entire neighborhood. It was a disaster zone. The snow had been sitting for nearly 5 days and was packed down hard in places. I had to make multiple passes on every street. When it was done, the roads were clear curb to curb for the first time since the whole mess began. Sunday morning, I woke up to find my porch covered in thank you notes, gift cards, and baked goods. Someone had even left a case of beer. Someone else left a $50 Home Depot card. Margaret came by in person with a card and a homemade pie. She told me I was a godsend and hoped I wouldn't hold any of this against the neighborhood. I told her I wouldn't. It wasn't the neighborhood's fault that Karen had been on a power trip. The aftermath was something else, though. Karen tried to contest the vote, claiming it was invalid due to procedural irregularities, but the bylaws were crystal clear and she had no ground to stand on. She and her husband actually listed their house for sale in February and were gone by April. I heard through Tim that she had talked about suing the HOA, but nothing ever came of it. Linda also resigned from the board and essentially disappeared from community life. The third board member who was removed, the one living out of state, apparently couldn't have cared less. He'd only bought the house as an investment property and barely knew what was happening. The new board turned out to be genuinely solid, and Tim served as president for about 6 months until proper elections could be held. During that time, they passed new rules requiring financial transparency, multiple competitive quotes for any services, and mandatory resident input on major decisions. They also formally documented my right to access the streets and included a note in the meeting minutes acknowledging my years of service. I kept plowing the streets that winter and the one after, still free, still just being a good neighbor. The difference now is that the HOA board occasionally votes to give me a small gift card as a token of appreciation, and they make sure everyone understands it's entirely voluntary on my part. Anyway, that's my malicious compliance story. Thanks for reading. And if any HOA presidents happen to come across this, be decent to your neighbors. You never know when you might need someone to dig you out of a hole. Sometimes quite literally. Before we wrap up the video, let's get through one more satisfying malicious compliance story. This one is titled "Parked 30 minutes longer than I paid for." So I went to a downtown restaurant last year. And like in many downtown areas, street parking is nearly impossible to find. I ended up using a lot and paid for 2 hours. I can't recall exactly what it cost, but I'd estimate around $30. I ended up staying 30 minutes past my allotted time. No big deal, I figured. Well, about a week later, I received a bill from the company that owns the lot. They wanted to charge me $80 for those 30 minutes. I called to dispute the charge, and while they did knock $20 off, I was still on the hook for $60 for half an hour of parking. So I logged into my bank account and scheduled 30 monthly payments of $2, figuring that if they were going to come after me like that, I'd at least make them process a $2 check every single month. They apparently decided it wasn't worth their time, because after just 10 payments, I received the 11th check back in the mail with a note saying my account had been paid in full. They wrote off $40 just to avoid processing my $2 checks anymore. And yeah, that's it for today. Thank you so much for watching. Please don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.